Ruthenium Spark Plugs. All hype or actually awesome? Let's find out. NGK makes some really bold claims about ruthenium. So we're going to need to have a decent test bench in order to compare and contrast these spark plugs to something that you're probably already running, Iridiums. This is my car's engine bay. It's a 2003 Mitsubishi Outlander XLS front wheel drive. It recently just had an oil change done with Royal Purple HMX 5W30. It has a wasted spark ignition system, which means there's two ignition coils and two sets of wires. The ignition coils are new, the wires are new, the spark plugs inside here are new, and we're not just going to be testing against the OEM spark plugs. We're going to be testing against NGK Iridium IXs. So these should be a pretty close to performance spark plug, but we'll see if there's any benefit to going to rutheniums. Now you might be wondering to yourself, what are we going to test and how are we going to test it? First test is going to be subjective. How good is the vibrations that we feel sitting at idle? Now admittedly, the first test is going to be a little bit subjective. It's going to be a test where we just sit at idle and see if it idles better. Does it vibrate harder? Does it vibrate less? Does the engine feel happier? To do that, we're going to have to get the engine up to temperature, drive it around a little bit, make sure everything's warmed up, transmission, engine, everything is lubed properly, and we're just going to sit for a little bit and kind of get a rating of how I feel the engine is just kind of sitting there, right? And then we're going to do the same test with ruthenium spark plugs. Now, this is not the only test. There's other things we can test, like miles per gallon or 0 to 60. And we're going to do that using this, my Scan Gauge 2. This will allow me to monitor my fuel economy. Yes, this thing does need to be calibrated to every single car. But yes, it has been calibrated to my car. I've had it calibrated for years now, and I'm pretty good at calibrating it. Next thing up is going to be 0 to 60. This thing will tell me my 0 to 60. So we're going to do 3 pulls with iridium, and then we're going to do 3 pulls with ruthenium and see if there's any difference. Now this is an automatic car with a torque converter 4-speed automatic transmission. I'm going to be keeping an automatic mode for this entire test to try and remove as many user variables as possible. The transmission was recently rebuilt and upgraded, so we shouldn't have any problems from the transmission. It was done less than 1,000 miles ago, so it's basically brand new. So let's start my car and get this test going. Let's get her up to temperature. As you can see, no check engine lights. Those were taken care of a while ago. And if we go over to the engine, you can hear it runs perfectly fine. Okie doke, we are at operational temperature. Our gauge is just below halfway, which is where you want it to be. We are on a flat and level surface in my garage, and we are idling at about 700 RPMs around there. All right, so subjective score, 1 being shake it like a salt shaker, and 10 being like you might as well be in an electric car because there's no engine to go shibbity-doop. So, what does it feel like? Well, it's definitely an older car, that's for sure. It has new motor mounts on the transmission, and the engine motor mounts, they're pretty old, but they're in good shape. So the vibrating score that I would give sitting here, probably a good 5 or 6 out of 10. It's definitely not like a new vehicle where it's like super smooth, but it's also not terrible. It feels like a 21-year-old car, like it should be, you know? So, you know, it's not terrible. But the question is, can ruthenium make this any better? All right, let's talk about the metric you guys really want to know about. 0 to 60 differences. Is there any by switching into a different spark plug? With the Scan Gauge 2, I can go to trip, performance, arm, And now it's going to measure my quarter to mile times as well as my 0 to 60s. I think you could also test your 60 to zeros, but we're not going to focus on that right now because that has nothing to do with the spark plugs. So I have to get to a safe place where I can do 0 to 60 pulls. I'm not going to film myself doing that because you're not supposed to be filming while driving. Duh. Got to be safe. But we're going to come back to this, and I'm going to show you each pull and show you the numbers, and then we're going to average out 3 pulls. And then when we switch to the rutheniums, we're going to do the same thing. All right, I just did the first pull. Not a fast car. 11.8 seconds to go from 0 to 60 miles per hour. All right, let's do another one. That last run was not one of my better runs. I got a little bit of wheel spin off the line. So we're going to go for our last run and try and go from there. And we got 12.6 on this last run. So let's go ahead and average that out. Once we average out those 3 runs, it comes out to be about 12.33 seconds. All right, so now that my brakes have cooled down a bit, it's time to go and see how many MPGs we can get. I'm going to be going on the highway, 65 miles an hour, with the cruise control on, taking care of everything, AC off, radio will be on, but that's not much of a power draw. And we're going to go around a loop that should be like 20-something miles, and we'll see what my average MPG is. We'll be able to keep track of my MPGs with this scan gauge. 65 miles an hour down the open road. So after using about almost a quarter of a tank, I've been driving along on the highway for long enough that it's dark outside now. Now then, the scan gauge only does single trip averages, meaning it does not store this data. This data will continue to be deleted every time the vehicle turns off and turns back on. And I just did 3 huge laps around my highway. So going forward and backwards, point A to point B, then point A to point B, and again point A to point B. And this is what we get, 25.4 miles per gallon average on Iridium Spark Plugs. Now, I'm going to go ahead and let the engine cool down. And then I'm going to put in my Ruthenium Spark Plugs, and we're going to do all these tests again. Well, as you guys can see, it's a brand new day today, and it is beautiful out. So doing some testing as we get the new spark plugs in should be awesome. All right, the first spark plug is out. NGK Iridiums. These are what I was running before. Looks pretty good, actually. Not terrible. A little bit of oil on the threads, but, you know, that's nothing completely bad. All right, the Ruthenium spark plugs are in the engine. They've got some new dielectric grease on the boots. Everything's torqued to spec. Now we just got to turn on the car and see how she feels. Okay, we are sitting in the car. I have not turned it on. It's going to be the first fire up with the spark plugs. All right, we're idling good. Got to let the car get up to a operational temperature before we take her anywhere. Alright, we are warmed up to operational temperatures, and we are idling in the same spot that we did before on a flat surface. And with the Ruthenium spark plugs in here, let's get that subjective score of just how vibraty this car feels when idling. It still has vibration. It is a 21-year-old car, but I would say the vibration is about maybe about the same, maybe 1 point higher on the scale that we used before. It's not going to make a dramatic difference, in my opinion, but it is slightly noticeable. That being said, again, old car. Let's get to the real meat and potatoes as to why you guys are here, though. You want to see if these perform better, so we're going to do 3 more 0 to 60 pulls and see what my numbers are. Well, things aren't looking good for the Rutheniums. We are getting slightly slower speeds than before. We're definitely not getting faster. That's the second run right there. Alright, that last one that we just did may have been a fluke because I had the AC on. But this one is without the AC, which explains the difference. Alright, we're getting some pretty consistent results. So, I'm not getting any faster than I was yesterday with the Iridiums. So then, the last question is, do I at least get better gas mileage? Well, we're going to have to find that out next. Now, despite the fact that we did in fact get slower times, I can tell you this much. After driving this car for most of my life, the power up at the top end of the RPMs is definitely better than before. With the Iridiums, it felt like it was starving for air, and it just didn't have the oomph past 5,000. But now the oomph is there all the way through the entire power band. It's just a different result in terms of the band of power that we're getting, which is interesting. I don't have a dyno. I wish I did. Otherwise, I could give you guys more concrete numbers. But as far as it feels, I mean, it feels smoother when you're running it really hard. It's just a little slower, which is weird because it really feels like as if you're going a little bit faster, but the numbers just don't support that. With the scan gauge reset and ready to go, we're going to test out fuel economy. On the road again, 65 miles an hour, cruise control, same 3 laps around the highway that I did before. Let's see what our MPGs are going to be at the end of this. Alright, I just got done doing 3 laps around the highway circuit, and each lap is approximately 13 miles. The extra mile or so is to get back to my house. And if we look at our MPGs, it was 25.8. We have the car idling right now, so let's go ahead and turn that off. So 25.7, 25.8 compared to last time, that's not bad. It's not a huge jump, but it's still not bad. So the question is, Iridium versus Ruthenium. Is Ruthenium worth the extra few dollars per spark plug? Well, I've got some thoughts on that. So when it comes to these spark plugs, it's a very slightly smoother ride. And I will say, up at the top end of the RPM range, it is better than before. Although surprisingly, not as fast as my Iridiums when I had it in the car. All I did was change the spark plugs. Who knows, maybe different days have different oxygen contents in the air, and being a naturally aspirated engine, maybe today just wasn't as good as a day. This is a real world test. This isn't like done on a dyno. Miles per gallon is more of the same. You're not going to get some magical miles per gallon increase. You know, it's marginal at best. Ultimately, it's going to take some time to really get used to these plugs and see how they last in the long run. This is very preliminary testing. So I might do some reviews and such about the spark plugs after I've had them for a while. So if you have questions in the future, leave a comment on this video. Until then, remember to drive safe, have fun.